Hello, welcome to Train Signal. This is the Monitoring Network Devices lesson in the System Center 2012 Operations Manager Training course. So what's new in 2012 when it comes to network device monitoring in Operations Manager? Well, pre-2012, Operations Manager did provide up-down monitoring for network devices and for other SNMP-based devices. If you wanted more comprehensive monitoring of those devices, you would have to purchase a third-party management pack or use what was called the XSNMP management pack, which was a freely available management pack that was written by a very smart guy who wanted to use Operations Manager for more than just up-down monitoring. Well, Microsoft made a very smart decision and hired this guy. And for 2012, the company has included much more functionality right out of the box with Operations Manager. The product no longer requires the use of the XSNMP management pack to monitor network devices to get more port statistics. In fact, don't use the XSNMP management pack in Operations Manager 2012 because you'll break Operations Manager. Out of the box, Operations Manager now includes support for up-down monitoring, port level statistics, and for certain devices, network device extended information, such as the ability to monitor for memory and processor utilization on a specific network device. Now, when I say port level statistics, this means things like traffic in, traffic out, errors, things like that. All the information that a network administrator needs to know in order to be able to understand the overall health of the network. There are 3 different levels of monitoring support available in Operations Manager 2012. First of all, right out of the box, Operations Manager will monitor any device that supports SNMP in an up-down mode. If the device supports what's called RFC 2863 and RFC 1213, extended port level statistics are captured. This means you'll get up-down monitoring and you'll be able to capture as much port level traffic information as is available on the unit. And if the device exists on the list available at the URL you see on your screen, the device is fully supported by SCOM. And in addition to the above, Operations Manager will capture details regarding device processor and RAM utilization. So what is SNMP? SNMP stands for the Simple Network Management Protocol, and it's a standard method by which network devices are managed and monitored. Now, it started out as simple. It's over the years become a bit more complex, but they haven't changed the name. But it still performs the basic task of managing and monitoring network devices. There are actually multiple versions of SNMP available out there. Version 1 was the original version, as you might expect. And this used a simple community string as a pseudo password mechanism. So basically, rather than having a username and password combination to be able to get to the SNMP capability in a network device, you simply have basically a password. And the default password for pretty much every SNMP device is public. And this public password, which is actually the word public, allows someone to gather information from that network device. There's also a private SNMP password for many devices, and it's called, as you may have guessed, private. The first thing that many network administrators do is to replace these 2 community strings with something a little less, maybe obvious is a good word. We're not going to go over that process in this course. It's beyond the scope of this course, but understand that the default public password is public. That's the one we're really interested in. So then we have SNMP version 2C. Now, there was a version 2. It wasn't around long. Version 2C is a newer implementation of SNMP, but it maintains the community string-based access mechanism, so it's easy to use, but it includes overall performance improvements and enhanced communication mechanism. Then we have SNMP version 3. This is the one where we add security. This adds additional authentication, privacy, and access control capabilities to SNMP. So, rather than just anyone being able to access the information that's on your switch or on your router, there's actually a username and password routine that has to be gone through in order for SNMP version 3 based devices to be accessed in this way. In case you're wondering, Operations Manager supports all 3 versions of SNMP. Part of SNMP is what's called an object identifier, or an OID. And this is how Operations Manager, or how SNMP, will identify the objects that are located in what's called a management information base, which we'll talk about in just a second. OID levels are often depicted as a tree. So if you think about a management information base being basically a database of what's available for statistics on a device, the OID is going to be a specific element that's in that database. Let's say you want to get the amount of RAM that's available on a particular switch. There's an OID, an object identifier, that holds that specific value. And when an SNMP call is made to that switch for that OID, the SNMP stack on that device will return the value in that field back to whatever device is requesting that information. And then we have Management Information Base, which is a collection that outlines the properties or variables of a managed object, such as a network switch or a server, that's shared between the device and the management system. Basically, the MIB, which is what's often called, is a database that resides generally on the device requesting pieces of information. And this is how the device knows what's available on that particular device. So it knows that a Cisco router has different SNMP capabilities than, for example, a Linksys home switch. A trap. This is one of the things that's kind of neat about network management software, is you can set what's called a trap, so that in certain circumstances, when something happens out of the network, a message can be sent from a managed device to a network management system. Basically, an alert can be raised. Now, I've already mentioned community string, but to make sure you understand what this really is, it's basically a pseudo password for SNMP monitored devices. It's hardly even a password, but it is the method by which these kinds of devices are accessed, and you'll have to create appropriate credentials in Operations Manager in order to be able to access SNMP-based devices from Operations Manager. Now, just like you do with other systems out on the network, you have to configure device discovery for network devices inside Operations Manager, and there's two ways you can do this. One is through what's called explicit discovery, which is basically where you, an administrator, provides a list of devices for Operations Manager to discover. Basically, Operations Manager isn't really discovering it, but at this point, you're basically telling it what to go out and look for. Now, this also assumes that there is an up-to-date list of devices, and I'm sure every organization, every person in every organization listening to this lesson right now has an absolutely pristine, up-to-date inventory. I kid. Most organizations, it's a little bit behind. But this basically assumes you know exactly what's out on your network, and you can provide that list to Operations Manager. As you might imagine, in a constantly changing environment, it could be a tedious process to configure network device discovery in explicit mode, because every time you make a change, you'd have to go into Operations Manager and tell Operations Manager about that change. But this is where recursive discovery comes in. This is where an administrator starts by providing a list of devices for Operations Manager to discover, just like you did before. But in this case, you may just provide it with maybe your main router. From there, Operations Manager then attempts to discover any devices that are connected to the identified items. Operations Manager then uses ARP, Address Resolution Protocol, to attempt to discover additional SNMP-based devices that can be brought into management under Operations Manager. This is much more automated than other processes, but it can also introduce significant stress on the management server. So you've got to make sure that you're bearing in mind ongoing stress on the management server versus a little bit of tedium when it comes to making changes to the network. And when it comes to authentication options for SNMP v1 and v2 devices, just a simple community string is needed. If you happen to have devices that support SNMP version 3, you'll need to create a full Run-As account with a username and password. For our purposes in this lesson, a simple community string is all we'll need. So, we're now ready for a demo. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an SNMP community string to use for discovery, and to basically use to capture statistics from any SNMP-based devices we may find out on the network. Next, we're going to create a discovery rule, an explicit discovery rule for network discovery. From there, we'll approve the addition of any devices that are discovered, and then we'll view the results. As you can see, I am back in the console, and I've gone to the administration area, expanded Run As configuration, and chosen accounts. We're going to create an SNMP community string to use for discovery. So I'll choose the Create Run As Account item in the Tasks pane, and we'll do Next. This is going to be a community string. We'll call it SNMP public. Next. Community string will be public. For this particular set of credentials, will you choose the less secure option, which will push the credentials to all management points or management servers and to any system that needs it, rather than having it be done on a more secure basis, which would mean that we manually send it to machines that may need this set of credentials. With highly sensitive credentials, you wouldn't want to use the less secure option, but public is not exactly a highly secure SNMP credential, so we'll choose the less secure option to move forward. And then click Create and close. Next, we'll associate this with a profile. We actually do have a SNMP monitoring account down here. So I double-click to that to open the Run As profile wizard. And click Next. No need to worry about anything here because it's all defaults. Then we'll choose to add our account, SNMP public, and just choose OK, and save. And we'll close the wizard. Next up, we need to create a discovery rule for networking. So you'll notice we have network management. We have discovery rules under network management in the administration area. So choose discover network devices from the tasks area. We're going to call this router discovery because we're going to make this an explicit discovery for the router. What network management server do I want to use? We'll just use the operations manager server. And we don't have resource pools here in this course, so we'll simply click Next. By the way, a resource pool is just a pooling of management servers. If you have a particularly large environment, you will definitely be pooling management servers to share the load. We're going to do an explicit discovery using the SNMP public Run As account. And I'm going to add a device. Now, I'll choose both ICMP and SNMP-based discovery. ICMP is basically ping. SNMP is what we just talked about. SNMP is port 161. It'll use version 1 or version 2 SNMP. And it'll use the default account that we created. If we wanted to, we could add a Run As account here as well. And you'll see some advanced discovery settings here. Retry attempts, ping timeouts, SNMP timeouts, and the maximum number of devices to discover. And click Next. Now, how often do we want to run this discovery? Do we want to run it once a week, once a day, what have you? Now, that's really your only two choices. You can run it anywhere from once a day to once a week, but you cannot run it more than once a day. So we'll run it at 2 a.m. On Saturdays, but we can also run it manually if we want to. Now, obviously, for an explicit rule, you don't need to necessarily have a schedule. That's more if you have a more dynamic rule. However, we're just going to leave that in place for demonstration purposes. And click Create. Now, I'm going to be asked, do I want to run this discovery rule right after the wizard is closed? I do, so I'll simply leave this checkbox in place and click Close. Now, ultimately, we're going to see items appear in Network Devices and in Network Devices Pending Management. But it's going to take Operations Manager a few minutes to be able to find basically the device that we've specified. I'm going to pause the lesson and we'll come back in just a few minutes. Now, after a few minutes of waiting, you'll notice we'll either see something come up in network devices pending management.
Bear in mind that a failed device will show up in the node, but it can be resubmitted for discovery when it's back in an operational state. If you've chosen to use the recursive discovery option, in this case, you'll simply rerun the discovery rule, and it'll go back out and it'll locate the device once again.
Or in network devices, which is where I see my device because it was automatically approved. Now, notice we have the address of the device here. The name, this is from a DNS lookup. This is its local address. There's a run as account that it was used to identify the device, and the access mode that it was used to identify the device. Double-clicking the device brings up basically a properties page that gives you more information about the device. You can see this is actually a router running DDWRT. It's an open source firmware for home routers. And it tells you what SNMP version is running, what the IP address is, and what the system object OID is. All kinds of information about the device. Let me click OK to close this window. Now what's left is to view the results of our efforts. Let's go take a look. We are back over in the Operations Manager console, and I'm in the monitoring area. And I'll scroll down the page just a little bit, and you'll see I've got network monitoring expanded. We can look at active alerts. And we're seeing some interface status information. Now if I right-click one of those, and choose Open, Health Explorer, theoretically. I'll go down to the administrative status information, be able to see exactly why this particular interface might be in an error state. In this case, the interface did not respond in a timely manner to a request to determine if it was up or down. And I would imagine the same goes for all of these interfaces that raise the same alerts. Yep. Now I know for a fact there's not 12 interfaces on this device, so it's probably just a pseudo interface in the device that doesn't really need to be monitored, and it's just always going to report us down regardless of whether or not a device is connected to a different port in the device or what have you. So it's 2, 3, 11, and 12. We could just disable these monitors if we wanted to, so we don't get these errors, but this allows us to see what kinds of errors we're seeing on our network. And so active alerts that have to do with network monitoring will always be in the network monitoring tab, as well as in the main active alerts section of Operations Manager. Now we have network devices. You can see we have a single network device sitting here. And here's some detail about that device. And you saw this information before. When you select an item, you have a number of options available in the tasks area from the Operations Manager console, including a number of reports if you wanted to run reports. We're going to take a quick peek at the network node dashboard. Now this device is pretty simplistic. We're not going to get a lot of information from it, if any. But as you scroll down, you can see you're getting some availability information for devices that support it. And really, just about any reasonable enterprise-grade device you buy will support the basics that you need to have. Response time. If you have the ability, you can get the processor information from the device. And if the ability is there, you also get interface stats from the device. How much traffic is being pushed through the device. Frankly, I'm a little surprised that this device does not support that kind of statistical information. But anything you use in the enterprise will give you that statistical information because they support the right set of capabilities that have to do with SNMP. Now, if I want to turn off these errors, I can simply multi-select all 4 of these and choose disable port monitoring. And that'll turn off the errors on those devices, on those ports. Eventually. It takes it a few minutes to kick its way through the system. And that's it for network monitoring. I wish I could show you some of the really cool new graphs that come with Operations Manager 2012 with regard to network monitoring. Unfortunately, the devices I'm using right now in my lab don't support those new features, but they're awesome. Give it a shot in your lab, and I think you'll find that the network monitoring in Operations Manager 2012 is really something pretty impressive. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.